there's more people to speak.
Let other people.
Oh, sorry.
My Lords, rising to speak after the contribution for the Labour Lord, Lord Moylan, and his representation of what reflects an extremely minority view, I'm going to restrain myself and simply say no jobs on a dead planet and leave it there. Coming to this group of the amendments, it won't surprise any members of this committee that I don't support Lord Moylan's amendments 224 or 230 or Amendment 226 in the name of the Noble Lord, Lord Lilly. I will agree with the Noble Lord, Lord Moylan, that we have an energy cost crisis. That comes from the price of fossil fuels, specifically the price of gas. And doubling down on more gas is the last possible direction we should be heading in terms of ensuring that people have warm, healthy homes. Of course, we wouldn't be in anything like as bad a position had we pursued renewables as we should have over the last decade, and particularly pursued home energy efficiency. However, it's a great pleasure to take part in this group so ably introduced by the noble lady Baroness Sheehan, and I think her Amendment 222A that started this group, and indeed the amendment on flaring, which, as the noble Lord, Lord Teverson says, demonstrates just how we are not, as the government likes to so often claim, world-leading, but in fact trailing by multiple decades on a basic measure of not polluting the planet, not just with climate gases, but with other gases, other pollutants as well, is very useful. But I think it's interesting that this group really, when we come right down to it, an energy bill, actually brings together the really crucial questions that come before us if we are talking about our energy future. And we have before us a range of possibilities. Now, Amendment 232 in the name of the noble Lord, Lord Teverson, that I and the noble lady Baroness Sheehan have also signed, says no new coal. Now, we would have thought, after the proposed development in Druridge Bay over 2 years ago now was turned down for the second time, that this amendment might have been seemed to be unnecessary. But as others have already noted, it was only in December that we had, astonishingly, a new coal mine approved in the UK. Now, just one commentary I'm going to draw on that Whitehaven new coal mine development. And I'm quoting here, it being labelled as economic and diplomatic idiocy, close quotes. Now, I did debate with myself whether idiocy was a parliamentary term or not, but I will note that I am quoting Ambrose Evans Pritchard from The Telegraph, the headline of his piece, which set out very clearly that British Steel does not want the high sulphur coal from Whitehaven. Tata is unlikely to use very much of it in its Port Talbot plant, and as the noble Lord, Lord Teverson said, 83% of it is expected to be exported, mostly probably be used for thermal purposes rather than steel. Now, the Australian private equity group developing it, EMRC Capital, hasn't dealt with the fact that it's very clear there is not a market for this coal, a long-term or even a medium-term market for this coal in Europe, and it's set to be a stranded asset long before the supposed closure date of 2049. So we have no new coal. The noble Lord, Lord Teverson has very ably introduced his Amendment 223, no new fracking, and having stood for more days than I can probably count at various anti-fracking camps up and down the country, probably most frequently at Preston New Road, but at many of the others, I was tempted to attach my name to the Labour Lord's amendment. But instead, I put down my Amendment my Amendment 227, which calls for a ban on new oil and gas. Now, the way I do this, and again, like the noble Lord, Lord Moylan, I'm drafting this myself. I'm very open to other suggestions of ways in which we might get to the same endpoint. But this sets out saying that within 6 months of this Act being passed, there must be regulations by statutory instrument to stop new oil and gas fields and new oil and gas exploration licences. So I think that if we followed 227, we wouldn't actually need 223, which is why I haven't signed the anti-fracking amendment. So what we have here in this group is a very clear division. We're saying no new coal, no fracking, or no new oil and gas. And after so many months of waiting the energy bill, this is where we actually get the opportunity for each party in this room to set out its position on new coal, oil and gas, and of course the government. And I know that there are many people out there in the country who are watching this very closely, people who truly understand that we are in a climate emergency. And the fact is, the evidence is very clear, the expert testimony is very clear that of course we can't have new coal, but we also can't have new oil and gas. Now, if we go to that, not what you'd call a radical organisation, the International Energy Agency, in 2021, 2 years ago now, it said new oil and gas fields must stop this year, in 2021. That's the International Energy Agency, in what was described as its most comprehensive report yet about what is needed to achieve the world's climate goals, the goals that the world has agreed to. Now, following on from that, in 2022, the International Institute for Sustainable Development did what the scientists would call a meta-analysis. It pulled together a huge range of studies, a huge range of pathways, and looked in great detail at the various pathways that different organisations and different groups have formulated to keep us below the 1.5 degrees that we agreed in Paris, and what has become crucially, acutely, agonisingly clear sense we have to stay below the 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels of warming. Now, to quote that study from the International Institute for Sustainable Development, it says there is a large consensus across all the published studies that developing new oil and gas fields is incompatible with the 1.5 degree target. Now, it's looking at, of course, at a wide range of studies. And it does note, and the source of these is interesting, that there are a few pathways, such as that developed by BP, that have a couple of years where oil and gas demand rises above the output expected from existing fields. However, within a couple of years, demand drops below the output of those existing fields, which means, of course, that new oil and gas immediately becomes those stranded assets that, of course, the Whitehaven coal field is going to become immediately. Now, I think the final reference I'll make in making the case for no new oil and gas to be written into this law is the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. The clue really is in the name. We have to stop spreading, allowing the development of new oil and gas. Now, the two countries that have explicitly signed up to this are Tuvalu and Vanuatu. And they, of course, are reminders of the fact that anything above 1.5 degrees sees the wiping out of whole nations. That's the reality. They're the people affected, they're the people speaking. This non-proliferation treaty has also been backed by the European Parliament and the World Health Organization, which brings up some of the other impacts of global warming. It's been backed by 70 cities, 101 Nobel laureates, 1,800 civil society organisations. We have a non-proliferation treaty is out there, and if Britain wants to live up to its role as COP26 chair, then the government today, the Noble Lord the Minister, could be setting out a place of real leadership, truly being world-leaning in signing up to my amendment or whatever form the Noble Lord the Minister might want to put it into. Now, this has particular relevance in terms of news in the past week. We have the chair announced of COP28, the chair who is the head of a large oil company. This is a message that really needs to be sent now. So I'm going to conclude my contribution by restating the point I made at the start, that here we have a chance, the nation is listening, as perhaps is not terribly often listening to our detailed debate in the Moses Room. What does each party represented in this room, what's their position on new coal, new oil, new gas? If there is no answer to that question, then the country will draw its own conclusions, and many people will be highlighting what's said in this room today.